Hei og velkommen til OKR-podden i samarbeid med Inevo, Høgskolen Kristiania og FutureWorks, Norges eneste OKR-målstyringsplattform. OKR-podden for deg som nysgjerrig på OKR og ønsker å lære mer om mål- og virksomhetsstyring. Vi vil diskutere alle aspekter og utfordringer knyttet til OKR, og du vil få en god blanding av diskusjoner, intervjuer med folk som har praktisk erfaring med OKR. Abonner på OKR-podden i Apple Podcast, Spotify eller der du hører på podcast. Og om du har spørsmål eller andre tanker og refleksjoner, gå inn på OKR-podden og kommenter.
Velkommen til OKR-podden, podcasten for deg som nysgjerrig på OKR og målstyring. Jeg heter Carl Philip Lund, jeg jobber i Inevo på Høgskolen Kristiania. Sammen med meg har jeg
Kim Lennon, og jeg CEO i selskapet FutureWorks.
Og i dag så har vi besøk av Jeff Gothelf. Har du lyst til å introdusere deg? I'm just kidding.
Are you talking to me? You probably are talking to me. I wouldn't know.
Yeah, Jeff is a guest today. He's probably one of the most authoritative figures when it comes to OKR in the world. You have maybe John Doerr, Christina Wodke, maybe what's the name of the other guy?
Felipe Castro.
Felipe Castro, and then you have Jeff Gothelf. Is that the right pronunciation? Jeff Gothelf?
Absolutely, yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
So who are you and why do you think this is interesting, OKRs?
Who am I? I'm a UX designer. That's what I used to be. I used to be a UX designer. That's why I started my career in the kind of the Web 1.0 days. And then I became a design manager, and I had to figure out how to do design in an agile software development world. And the nice thing about that is I wasn't alone. And in doing so, we came up with some ways that worked for us. And we wrote a book about it called Lean UX. Lean UX did very well as a book. You know, it's a very kind of niche book by designers for designers about a very specific topic. And that changed my life in the sense that people were now asking me to teach what's in the book. And so over the last 10 years since Lean UX has been out, I've worked both as a product manager, as an entrepreneur, and then most recently as a teacher of ideas from Lean UX, ideas from our second book, Sense and Respond, and how all of these work towards redefining the way that we do product management, the way that we build companies, the way that we lead companies, the way we do design for an increased focus on the customer and an increased focus on the agility of our organizations. Now, the interesting thing about OKRs is that they've been around a long time. I mean, more than 40 years at this point. And there has been a lot of activity around it, particularly since Google came out and John Doerr came out with his book and said, you know, Google's doing it, everybody should do it. And when I started to look into it, it fit so well as sort of the beginning part of the conversation that I was already having with a lot of organizations. And so basically it was almost like I was missing a chapter in my story, and OKRs chapter 1 basically in the story is what they made me realize that I was missing, which is how do we properly set goals and incentivize teams in a way that encourages customer centricity and organizational agility. And that's why OKRs are interesting to me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I think you're the first UX designer that has been on. And I've felt the same things as you when it comes to just, I'm a big fan. I used to be a big fan of, what's the name of the guy from General Electrics that said strategy is basically pick a general direction and implement like hell.
Jack Welch.
Jack Welch, yeah.
Yeah.
And when I've been a fan of that statement because things change as you get started and implement like hell. But when I use that in the conversations with organizations, there was something missing from that. And I think that was the systemic approach that OKRs has, because it kind of puts some more meat on that statement, pick a general direction and implement like hell.
Yeah, a lot more meat. I would say. Although, again, the interesting thing about this whole system, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but like people like explain OKRs. I can explain OKRs in 3 minutes, right? Probably less. As a concept, it's a very simple concept. It's the implementation of it and the sort of the downstream effects of the implementation that make it difficult, particularly at scale, right?
Yeah.
But the concept itself, super simple.
Why don't we give you 3 minutes and you can do just that?
I can do it. I can do
1,
this.
2, 3, go.
Go. Right. So look, I mean, it's a goal. It's in my opinion, it's a human-centric goal-setting framework when done correctly, where the objective is a qualitative aspirational goal for the team that the team can align around that says, this is why we're doing this work, right? We're trying to become the most effective way to purchase a car online in Norway, something along those lines. And the qualitative, aspirational, inspirational, and ideally time boxed. We'd like to achieve this by the end of 2024, for example. The key results are the metrics that tell you whether or not you've achieved that objective, that qualitative objective. So this is the quantitative side of the conversation. And the fundamental difference that makes this unique and difficult is that, in my very strong opinion, your key results need to be measures of human behavior. So your indicators of whether or not you've achieved the goal of becoming the most effective way to buy a car online in Norway by the end of the year are going to be measures of human behavior. And those humans in this particular case would probably the customers of the company. And the customers could be the car buyers, it could be car dealerships, it could be auction houses, it could online marketplaces, whatever. But the point is that the measure of success is what are people doing differently to tell us that we've achieved the objective. That's it. That's the framework. And that's just to draw one tiny distinction, right? The key results are these outcomes, these measures of human behavior, whereas traditionally almost every organization manages to output, which is the making of stuff, right? The measure of success is we made a thing and we put it in the marketplace, right? And so that's it. That's the definition of the system, and it's a really easy concept to describe.
So human behavior, the key results are a measure of human behavior?
Yes.
Yeah.
So a tip here for people listening in to write good OKRs, be observant on the target group in the objective, is what you're saying. For example, measure the human behavior, the change in human behavior.
So so of course the first question that comes up is, well, which humans?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I
so
think
the target group.
Yeah, the target audience, exactly.
Yeah.
And look, depending on what level, like if you're writing an OKR like I just described, become the most efficient way to buy a car online in Norway by the end of the year, you're the head of that business unit or the head of that startup. And so the key results may reflect the behaviors, like I said, of maybe 3 different target audiences, right? The end consumer, car dealerships, and maybe auction houses that you partner with, right? So you sort of have a B2C and maybe 2 B2B plays, right? But if you're somewhere within that organization, you're a product manager, and if you're in charge of the consumer facing portion of the experience, then your key results are all the end consumers, right? But yes, which humans are we trying to impact is one of the next logical questions.
Interesting.
Because one of the sorry, because one of the greater challenges I don't know, that is probably all over the world, but one of the greater challenges people have and businesses have is creating good OKRs.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
I think because there's nobody there to really stick, number one, really hold their feet to the fire, as we say, about your key results must be measures of human behavior. Number one, I think it's a lot easier to understand output as a key result. So, hey, we'll become the most effective way to sell cars online in Norway when we ship the mobile application. It's a lot easier to understand that. I think that's number one. So nobody's explicitly holding their feet to the fire. I think the next thing is that if we do make sure that the key results are measures of human behavior, then I think the next conversation is, does the OKR actually make sense? I think is another good question. Like, just because you wrote an OKR that fit the syntax, qualitative, objective, quantitative measures of behaviors, of key results, the two things make sense, right? Like, if these behaviors change, does that mean that we have achieved this objective? I don't think a lot of people ask those questions. No. And then the third thing, and there's lots more, we could talk about this for a long time, but I think the other thing, and this is something that it's one of those assumptions that I think you have earlier in your career. And then I think, it's kind of like growing up, where like, when you're a kid and you're growing up and you're like, my parents know everything and they know exactly what they're doing. And then as you grow up and maybe you start having your own family and you kind of get a little bit older, you're like, okay, they don't really know what they're doing. They're sort of guessing like the rest of us, right? I think when you're early in your career in an organization, you make an assumption that leadership knows what they're doing and that they have a clear strategy defined in a direction they want to take the company. And one thing I've learned over the last decade is that overwhelmingly, there either isn't a clear strategy inside organizations, or it's simply not well known or well understood across the organization. And that means that your goals, your OKRs in this particular case, are going to be all over the place. And so being able to say this is a good one versus this is a bad one becomes impossible without the context of a clear strategy. And so I think this is why those are just three. I think there's probably 50, but like those are three that certainly create the challenge of writing a good OKR statement.
But you've worked with approximately how many companies throughout the last 20 years? Like 100, 200, 500? Just a quick estimate, how many of those organizations do you think lack a clear strategy?
I'd say 90%.
So
90% either lack a clear strategy or do not communicate it clearly to the staff, and therefore the organization has no idea.
Why is that? Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of folks believe that make money is a strategy, which it's not. It's an outcome of a good strategy. I think that secrecy. I think the opposite. Let's look at it the opposite way. I think transparency is in short supply in organizations, particularly as they scale. I think leaders, tend to speak in generalities rather than specifics because it saves their butts in the case that the strategy doesn't work out. And so, yeah, I think that's a lot of it. I think that's kind of where all this comes from.
Interesting. Let's drill into the 10% of the companies. Do you have any examples of the 10% of companies that really have a clear strategy that you've worked with the last 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's interesting because they vary from so for example, I did a lot of work in OKR work specifically with Paddy Power Betfair. So online gambling, be super clear about the industry that they're in. And they have a clear strategy. Like they have a very clear strategy about the kinds of products that they're building, who their target audience is, what success means to them. And it's not just make money. They've got very specific targeted OKRs across the organization. I thought that was interesting. We did a case study in Sense and Response, a little older than 5 years at this point. We did a case study in Sense and Respond, which is our second book, with a company called Auto Trader in the UK. Though there's a company in the US called Auto Trader. I don't think there's any actual business link between the two, but they're in a similar space. But Auto Trader UK, which went from a 4,000 person print publication for 30 or 35 years, maybe 40 years, to 1,000 person digital company that owns 87% of the market when it comes to buying cars online and selling cars. And they had a very clear strategy about what they wanted to do, and it worked.
They ran month or quarterly OKRs, or did they?
They did, and they moved into this more customer centric, experimental, agile way of working. It's been a while since I spoke to them, so I don't know where things stand today. But certainly that was where they were headed when we were working with them.
I think it's so interesting that you said 90% of companies, because that's I've worked with quite a few companies as well, and I approach it every company. I think okay, they probably have it all figured out, and then as I get to know them, I just learned that your stats seem to be right also in the Norwegian market. And I'm just wondering, why is it like that? It's just strange. But it can't be that easy, I guess. Because then everybody would have done it.
Hard. Well, I mean, it doesn't feel hard to give, if you're, I feel like it's your job. If you're in the C-suite, if you're in a leadership position over a business unit, then, one of the phrases that we use a lot in our practice is autonomy through alignment.
Mm-hmm.
We want to build autonomy. We want folks to operate under their own free will with their expertise and their experience and the evidence that they're collecting from the marketplace. But they can't do that without a clear alignment of the purpose of the strategy, right? You can't make any decision that you're making without strategy is a blind decision.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You're like, okay, this doesn't work. Okay, then we'll change it. But you have an infinite number of ways to change it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the right way? It's the one that helps us achieve our strategy more effectively. And I think that without that filter, you don't have that alignment. And I think you're going to get a lot less autonomy because people are going to keep asking, should I do this? Should I do this? Should I do this? Okay.
Yeah. What kind of strategy do you have right now?
For what? For my business?
Yeah.
So it's a great question, and I do dog food this stuff every year. The strategy that I have for 2023 is I want to increase the my goal is to drive more self-service products into my business. Like my goal is to essentially decrease the dependency on me personally.
Mm-hmm.
That's my strategy for 2023 into 2024. The tactics for that is currently more self-service products and then more royalty-based products. And so there's OKRs around not so much the creation of those products, but more about the uptake of those products, partnerships with organizations to create those products, distribution, that type of thing. So, but that's the strategy is to reduce the dependency on me because you're looking at my company. This is it.
Yeah. So for the Norwegian market, it's partnerships like with the Videocation, where you've created an OKR course.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example of that. That was a partnership that came my way. I knew some folks in the organization. They happened to have a video studio not far from where I live. That was convenient. Yeah. And yeah, that's a perfect example of that.
Yep. Do you also do e-learning? Have you created like e-learning programs or?
Yes. So there's self-service courses on my website, specifically the around OKRs, lean UX, and coming soon, lean product management as well. And so so there's courses available there. Yeah.
Yep. Great.
So I just one question, Jeff. You mentioned the strategy, then you mentioned tactics. In the where does the OKRs come then after the tactics? You said no.
So in sort of like if we're thinking about sort of a linear workflow. Yeah. So it's so dangerous to talk as somebody who's like touts agile and continuous learning, et cetera. But if we're thinking about sort of a process, strategy, OKRs, and then solution hypotheses, right? So tactics written as hypotheses. That's sort of the way that I see that process, right? So it's kind of like where are we headed? How do we know if we got there? What do we think we should do to get there?
Mm-hmm. It's kind of the pyramid where you have vision, mission, strategy, OKRs, activities, and initiatives. Isn't that the standard OKR pyramid? Yeah.
It's always I just always want to reflect the uncertainty of the real world by positioning those initiatives as hypotheses.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference between a hypothesis and I guess that's from your analytics background, because hypothesis, that's maybe when you look at the strategy pyramid, you have activities and initiatives. Yeah. Well, you phrase it as hypotheses, and that I like that.
Yeah. So look, a hypothesis simply, in my opinion, reflects the real world doubt around the work that we're doing. Right? We all like to believe that we know exactly what we're doing. We know exactly what it's going to look like when it's done. We know exactly what it's going to take to get there. And we know exactly the ROI we're going to get on that initiative. The reality is we're going to be wrong.
Yeah.
To some extent. We're just not going to be 100% right about those things. And so let's be honest about that. It's a near impossibility in large organizations, but let's be honest about it. Let's instead of saying we know, let's say we believe. Right? We believe that if we do this in this way for these people, right, this is how their behavior will change, right? And based on that, right, that helps us. Maybe that's a leading indicator for our key results, which is ultimately our way to determine whether or not we're achieving the strategic goals of the organization. And so instead of saying, build the mobile app, right, which is an initiative, okay, right, you're saying we believe we should build a mobile app for our online car buying service and target affluent, buyers of their second car as our first audience, because whatever the justification is, right? And we'll know we're successful when we see adoption by this target audience increase by X percent, the number of cars sold to this audience increase by Y percent, the revenue generated by it by Z percent, whatever it is, right? But those, I just want to be clear that I have a strong opinion about the initiative that we should take, but I reserve the right to change course and my mind in the face of contradicting evidence. That's it. And it's such a rare quality in a culture, in an organization, in a company. But yet, when we start to position our work as hypotheses, it's a bit of a Trojan horse in many ways. If I said to a CEO, for example, or a C-suite executive, you have to be more humble and reflect the real world doubt in your work, it generally doesn't go anywhere. It's because these folks, they're in leadership roles and they believe that they should be confident and consistent and on point. But if we say, look, let's frame our work then as hypotheses. Okay, it's less threatening, and it's a bit of a Trojan horse that starts to introduce this reality that we're going to be wrong to some extent. So let's make sure that we're right before we continue and continuously invest in this idea.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm thinking about you being a UX person. How many percent of the leaders that you've worked with have some kind of organizational design or UX background? Would companies be better if more people understood the principles of UX?
Yes.
Or is it? Yeah. And
short answer is yes.
Yeah. And what kind of principles, if you were to explain kind of those principles to a CEO that's listening now, what are the unique characteristics of a UX designer's approach to strategy and management?
All right. So look, hang on. I wrote a whole book about this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I mean, literally, that's what this book is about.
Awesome.
Sense and respond.
Sense and respond, right? And the subtitle is How Successful Organizations Listen to Customers and Create New Products Continuously. Now, this is a business book. It's published by Harvard, so legitimately a business book. That was the plan.
And
that was by design.
And you get money for it.
I get occasionally. This was the second book that I wrote with Josh Seiden, and it was designed to do exactly what Carl was suggesting, right? Which is how do we start to bring these human-centric, this advocacy for the consumer to leadership, and in so doing, create the cultures that adopt more human-centric ways of working, right? And what are those qualities? And again, we've been dancing around them. I mean, discussing them here for the duration of this conversation, right? It's about understanding who our target audience is. Understanding what they're doing today, understanding why they're doing it, setting goals based on positive, meaningful impact to those behaviors and to those target audiences. And then creating the kind of culture that embraces that humility and that real world doubt of the work that we're doing, that then allows the teams the autonomy to build learning and experimentation into their ways of working. Those are the qualities that I would expect to see in a leadership team that is customer centric, that has a kind of a designer's mindset. They don't have to be designers themselves, but that would be the mindset that I would look for. And when you do that, you get that autonomy through the alignment, but you also get empowered teams, what Marty Kagan calls empowered teams, right? These teams that are making evidence-based decisions about how to best iterate our products and services forward. You know, what's really fascinating, and this is a thing that I think a lot of people know, but don't consciously think of, because we've got such a culture of manufacturing still built into the ways that we work, right? Pretty much like, and it's the point we make in the first half of that book, which is, you know, every business is a software business. You know, if you're building a business of scale, a business that seeks to scale today, you do it with technology, with software. The nature of modern technology is continuous, right? Like when I started working, you know, we made static software, and then we burned it onto CDs and mailed the CDs to people or put them in a store. You know, no one goes to the store and buys a box of software anymore, right? And so, and these continuous systems make the delivery of software a non-event, right? Where it was like when you work on something for 9 months and then you print 15 million CDs, like we did at America Online back in, 2001. That's an event. You have a party to celebrate. Yeah, you get a T-shirt with the name of the project on it. It's amazing, right? But today, because we can deliver continuously, the delivery aspect of it becomes a non-event, right? And anything that you deliver, you have to live with forever, right? Like until you decide to deprecate it. And who deprecates features? Nobody deprecates anything, right? And so you got to live with this code forever. And so I think people don't realize that. And so if the delivery of the thing becomes a non-event, right? You think about the extreme cases, right? The extreme case here is Amazon. They deliver code to production every second. Once a second. My watch, really excited every time. It's an Apple Watch, but it's super excited about Amazon for some reason. You can't have a party every time you deploy code if you're deploying every second, right? The measure of success has to shift, and that's where OKRs come bring this all the way around, right? Yeah. The measure of success has to shift from delivering a thing to positively impacting the behavior of the people. And the reality is that the ideas that we come up with for impacting that behavior are going to be wrong. And the faster that we can learn that, and these continuous systems give us that feedback, right? The faster we can adjust course to something more, something better for the users.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned Amazon. Do they use some OKR?
I don't know. I don't know exactly. That's a great question. My assumption would be yes, some form of it, given everything I've read. I don't think anyone's explicitly come out and said Amazon uses OKRs, as far as I know.
I know a little bit about it because I bumped into. Are you familiar with the Amazon 6-pagers?
Yes.
No?
Yes. It took me a second. Yes, I do.
I think when you read through the structure of an Amazon 6-pagers, I think they've kind of integrated OKRs into that approach without calling it OKRs. Because they I don't know if Kim, are you familiar with Amazon 6-pagers?
Nope.
How when you have an idea at Amazon, before you present it, you have to write a 4 to 6 page paper about that, and that has to be structured in a very specific way. And one of the things that you have to include in a 6-pager is a reversed press release, and that kind of describes the desired situation communicated through like a rant or a press release, so that it's easy to understand. And I think that's just contradictory to all the companies that talk about how fast you have to move. Well, Amazon moves kind of slow in the beginning. I think that's an interesting approach. Yeah, you have to take a step back, think, and then think a lot.
Tell a story, right?
And tell a story.
Tell a compelling story.
Yeah.
Right. You can't just be like, mobile app.
No.
Like, tell me.
Structured thinking and
yes.
Yeah. I was wondering, the book that you wrote, Sense and Respond, published by Harvard Business Review.
Yes.
That did not sell as many copies as your first book.
Why are you here to hurt my feelings?
No, you mentioned it in your. I saw. I just saw a clip of you speaking to on another YouTube video or something.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is that because the first book you wrote about UX and lean was target audience was designers and UX people, while the second book, The Sense and Respond, was UX principles targeting business people? Maybe.
Look, so I'll say a couple of things. Look, I think Sense and Respond is a fact, did not sell nearly as many copies, or has not sold nearly as many copies as Lean UX. Mm-hmm. That said, it's an evergreen. It was written to be an evergreen book, and I'm super happy that I continuously, on a weekly basis, someone mentions it somewhere in my social media feed. Someone mentions it, which makes me happy because it's at this point it's a 6-year-old book since it came out. Why didn't it sell? It's, as well. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a variety of variables and answers, but I think one of them is probably what you're suggesting. I think, Josh and I were two designers still at the time, writing a business book for business people. Now, that hasn't stopped other designers from being successful. All the IDEO books have been really successful, but I think that's part of it as well. But it continues to do well. It has, I think it's had an impact. I don't know, but I'm super proud of it. And I think that I do think it's an evergreen book. I think the concepts are evergreen and perhaps even more relevant today than they were in 2017 when it was published.
I think when you explained, I haven't read any of those books, but when you explained that book, I wanted to buy it because I'm more interested in the business side. I like the design side, but I'm more on the business side, and that book seems to fit me better than the lean or the designer books or lean UX books. And it kind of reminds me of 37 Signals and Getting Real, and they wrote 2 books as well. And I think Getting Real was the book for developers. And then they wrote a book afterwards that was targeting more business people. And I'm thinking that they had the same experience, that the first book sold a lot of copies and the second book didn't sell that many books. But I think that's unfortunate because business people should learn more about design principles and development principles. So,
absolutely. And again, it's not like, look, none of these books are teaching executives how to design.
No.
Right? All of these books are taking sort of designer philosophy or design philosophy and applying it to management. That's what design thinking did, right? They just were infinitely more successful than the rest of us, right? At doing it. You know, and there's a lot of credibility there coming from Stanford and everything. And look, it's good stuff, right? It should be successful, but that's what it is. It's applying sort of this designer's mindset and the designer's toolkit, not the design process itself, but the design mindset to in leadership.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're getting close to having to wrap up here. We usually ask our guests if we can help them with something. Do you have anything that you would like us to help you with?
To help me with, I would like you to help me achieve my strategy in 2023 and 2024 of reducing the dependency on me, on scaling myself without building a business, a consulting business, but which is what I've done. I've done that in the past, and look, and it was a fantastic experience, and it was very stressful, and I'm not interested in doing it again. No. And so that's my goal. Like my goal is to kind of draw more attention to the self-service and online education products that I've been putting together. And if there's stuff that people would like to see from me, to let me know. Hey, it'd be really great if you had a course on X. And if I haven't thought of these tremendously valuable.
Interesting. So Kim, do you want to kind of summarize? Usually Kim summarizes towards the end of the conversation, but I guess in this case we have a full transcript. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask AI to summarize this conversation, and we'll send it to you and see how well it does.
Oh, I love AI.
But Kim, do you want to try to do the human version of summarizing?
I keep it in short. I think the three tips that Jeff came with on creating good OKRs, both a qualitative objective, but a quantitative key results that measures the change in human behavior in the target group in the objective. And that you can, is it one making sense? If we reach our key result, does that mean that we have reached our objective? And have a clear strategy with clear priorities to create the OKRs from. I think that is a good tips for making good OKRs to the people that's listening into this podcast.
Great. And when are you coming to Norway again? Have you?
I don't have any plans immediately, but I love Norway. I've been to Norway many times, and I've only seen 3 or 4 cities in Norway, and I have aspirations to see a lot more. So I'd love to. I don't even need an excuse, really. I don't have any plans, but I'd love to. I really love it up there.
So if you want to come this summer, you're welcome.
I've never been in summer, actually. I really want to go. Like I've always been sort of in the dead of night, when it's cold, in the dead of winter, when it's dark and cold. But I'd love to come in summer. That sounds amazing.
Maybe we can try to host a conference or something.
You guys aren't around in the summer. Don't give me that.
No, not July, but
it's fantastic in Norway in summertime. So it's good and warm, and you can go swim, and it's right up. I think it's right up your alley. It's super nice.
I love it. I can't wait.
You can okay. Thank you for listening, everybody. We're gonna cut the recording right now, and thank you for listening.
OKR-podden gjort mulig av Inevo, Wavbook og Futureworks, Norges eneste OKR-plattform, som hjelper deg med å sette fart på innovasjon, utvikling og vekst.